We have direct proof now that Israel's ambassador to the United Nations back in 2021 sent out emails to state representatives and state officials telling them to divest from Unilever, Ben and Jerry's parent company, because they decided to stop selling ice cream in the Israeli occupied Palestinian territories. The reason this is so shocking is because now we see the exact email chain where Israeli officials were pushing state governments in the United States of America to take action against American companies because those companies are taking action against a foreign government. We have states now choosing to side with the government of Israel instead of American companies. You might have seen this guy before. This is Gilad Erdan. He was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations back in 2021. Now, none of this is new, except for the fact that now, through Freedom of Information Act requests, I was able to find the exact email chains that were sent out by Gilad Erdan to Ron DeSantis at the time, telling him that Unilever needs to be taken action against. So here's an article back from 2021. Israeli ambassador asks 35 U.S. states to take action against Ben and Jerry's for ending sales in the Israeli occupied territories. Ben and Jerry's stated they wanted to end sales in the occupied territories because of the apartheid, because of the fact that they're under occupation, and of course Israel swiftly rebuked that and started having state governments take action against Ben and Jerry's. So here's an article here's the first letter that Gilad Erdan sent to Ron DeSantis at the time, which is just absolutely shocking. Not only to read this email, but then to see the chain of events that transpired and how quickly they transpired after this email was sent from Ron DeSantis, and then taking action Florida against Unilever, Ben and Jerry's parent company, telling them that they will be divesting, and then legal action taken by Ben and Jerry's against Unilever. This shows now the depth and level of government corruption by foreign entanglement. So the Honorable Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, anti-Semitic act of discrimination and boycott by Ben and Jerry's. Of course, anti-Semitic. This is the trope that they love to resort to when you take action against a country that's committing occupation. So, as a friend of the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and in the name of our shared values of democracy and equality, I wish to bring you an important matter to your attention and ask for your assistance. Earlier today, this is how quickly this guy sent out the letter. He didn't even hesitate to wait. Earlier today, July 19th, Ben and Jerry's announced the intention to boycott hundreds of and thousands of Israeli citizens living in Judea and Samaria. That's the occupied West Bank. They call it by their biblical definition, Judea and Samaria. We view this decision very severely as it is de facto adoption of anti-Semitic practices and advancement of the delegitimization of the Jewish state and the dehumanization of the Jewish people. Taking action against a country, not only did they say they're not going to, they never said they're not going to stop selling ice cream in Israel. They said they're not going to sell ice cream in Palestinian territories. It has nothing to do with Israel. It's Israeli occupied. But apparently this is anti-Semitic. This is the trope they always push for. In addition to the great moral difficulties that derives from such a boycott, Ben and Jerry's announced policy seems to also trigger potential legal ramifications based on laws legislated by over 35 states, including the state of Florida, meant to counter these types of hate-driven boycotts. I believe today, as I did back in 2018 when I served as Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, that rapid and determined action must be taken to counter such discriminatory and anti-Semitic actions. We must stand united and send an unequivocal message that this will not be tolerated. As Arab nations cancel their decades-long boycott of the Jewish state and sign peace agreements with Israel, and cultural and economic cooperation in our region is growing, American companies with radical ideological agendas cannot be allowed to go against the policy of the United States and act against normalization and peace. Moreover, the past has proven that the citizens of Israel have never complained And the only ones who suffer from such boycotts as these significantly harm Palestinians as well. Piss off, dude. Don't include Palestinian suffering in your name to push your agenda. It's disgusting. For example, in the supermarkets of Judea and Samaria, where Ben& Jerry's products are sold, both Israelis and Palestinians work and shop. The BDS movement is not interested in promoting peace or a better future for the Palestinians, BS, but rather in demonizing and discriminating against Israel and the one true democracy and America's strongest ally in the Middle East. Very similarly to the Airbnb case of November 2018, which I'm going to speak about because I want to take legal action against that. Ben& Jerry's policy seems, as mentioned above, to also violate the anti-BDS laws of many states, including the law of your own great state. As a response to the policy change announced by Airbnb in 2018, several lawsuits were filed against the company, both in Israel and in the United States. And several states spoken out and even acted to enforce their laws against the company. These combined efforts were successful in getting Airbnb to reverse its discriminatory policy within a short period of time. I ask that you consider speaking out against the company's decision and taking any other relevant steps, including in relation to your state laws and the commercial dealings between Ben& Jerry's and the state of Florida. Sincerely, Gilad Erdan, Ambassador of Israel to the United Nations. So that is the first letter that was sent. I have a whole email chain that I was able to find through Freedom of Information Act requests that were sent back and forth between Ron DeSantis, between Unilever, between the Florida Business Association, just back and forth between many individuals. Within July 19th, when this announcement was made, all within a week, these people were just going rapidly psycho at this. That is the level now where we have an Israeli ambassador to the United Nations at the time taking and somehow getting in cahoots with a governor of Florida to take action against that governor's own American companies. And the governor was all in cahoots. He was ready to go. He was ready to do it. That's what's so crazy about this. Now, for those who don't know, the United States has anti-BDS laws in place, which thankfully are going to be overturned within the next 5 years, very likely. And basically those laws, including the federal government now under RFK Jr., those laws state that if you are an American company and you decide to take action and boycott Israel, action will be taken against you. That's illegal. If you are a scientist, RFK Jr. just announced this recently, if you are a science research lab in the United States of America, and you require federal funding or you are requesting federal grants, you have to sign now a document that says you will not participate in a boycott of Israel, meaning you can't boycott Israeli products, Israeli materials, Israeli chemicals, whatever you need for your research lab. If you feel that Israel is committing human rights violations and you decide to boycott them, the US federal government is not going to give American research labs money and grants because they're boycotting a foreign nation. So the reason I said within the next 5 years that is very likely going to be overturned is because it is a very obvious constitutional violation. It doesn't work with the Constitution. This is just pure simple that if it got to the Supreme Court, they would immediately strike it down nationally. So why hasn't it gotten to the Supreme Court yet? There have been cases. There have been cases. The most strongest case has actually been with the American journalist Abby Martin, who was not allowed to speak at a university in Georgia after she didn't want to sign a contract stating she will not boycott Israel. And it was very close to making it to the Supreme Court. And then the state of Georgia changed the laws to make it no longer applicable to her court case. However, very recently, we're starting to see more states amend these laws. And if it does get to the Supreme Court, a lot of lawyers say that very likely it simply will just be struck down. So anyways, aside from that, though, that's just some context. Now, what we ended up seeing in the next email, and let me go ahead and share my screen, is there started to be back and forth between Florida's government and Unilever. And of course, Unilever was not happy with this whatsoever because of the fact that this would ultimately end up affecting their finances. So let me see here. Let me go ahead and share this tab over here and make sure you guys can clearly see it. There we go. That looks like a good one. I'll zoom in for you guys. And this was by this letter was written by Jacob Williams, and Jacob Williams worked with Florida. He's clearly acting as the SBA corporate director, okay, governance manager, and he's basically reaching out to Mr. Williams. So there's Jacob Williams, and then there's Richard Williams, and Richard Williams works with Unilever at the time. So kind of confusing. There's two Williams, but one William is reaching out. One William from Florida is reaching out to Unilever. I would like to request an engagement on behalf of Florida State Board of Administration. We manage the pensions and assets for the state of Florida, including approximately 2.2 million shares of Unilever. Today, Unilever subsidiary Ben & Jerry's published the statement, Ben & Jerry's will end sales of our ice cream in the occupied Palestinian territory. Ben & Jerry's stated that they will no longer be selling ice cream products in the occupied West Bank as of the end of their current contract with the Israeli distributor. This limitation of commerce within Israel or Israeli-occupied territories is addressed by the Florida statute section entitled Prohibited Investments by the State Board of Administration, Companies that Boycott Israel. This statute defines boycott of Israel as refusing to terminate business activities or taking other action to limit commercial relations with Israel or persons or entities doing business in Israel or in Israeli-controlled territories in a discriminatory manner. This is what is so crazy about this, is that this law of boycotting Israel also applies to Palestinian territories. They say Israeli-controlled territories. It's Palestinian territories that are Israeli-occupied. That is how this law is written in a way that if you simply don't support illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, that is against U.S. law now to boycott that. So you might be wondering, well, how does the government of Florida end up taking action against that? And why should Unilever even care? Because of the fact that these state governments have investments in these large companies, millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of investments. And if they feel that Unilever, which is basically the parent company of Ben & Jerry's, is boycotting a foreign nation, well, they're going to pull out those investments. They're going to divest. They're either going to divest or they're no longer going to be investing anymore. That's kind of where the law goes. And if you're a company like Unilever and you're now hearing of a state government divesting millions of dollars of assets, then you're going to immediately be like, well, this isn't okay. But it did end up happening. And it wasn't just Florida. However, I was able to get the Freedom of Information Act request documents from Florida, but New Jersey to pull $182 million out of Unilever over Ben & Jerry's and Israel. Again, this was back in 2021. New Jersey has become the latest state to announce plans to divest from the company that owns Ben & Jerry's over its decision to stop selling ice cream in Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. Of course, New York Times didn't want to write the word Palestinian. The state's Division of Investment sent a letter this week to Unilever, the parent company, that a state law passed in 2016 prohibited the investment of state pension funds in businesses that engaged in boycotts. At the start of this week, New Jersey had $182 million invested in Unilever stocks, bonds, and other securities, a spokesperson for the state's Treasury Department said. We believe it is consistent with our values for our products to be within an internationally recognized illegal occupation. That is the company said online. This move comes as a response to Ben & Jerry's announcement. So we started seeing states now take action against American companies, not because those American companies are violating and doing something that jeopardizes America, but because those companies are taking action against a foreign country. Now, if you were governor of a state in the United States of America and you had a foreign country now telling you to take action against an American company, so one of your companies, you're an American governor, these are your American companies that you want to protect because obviously you want to make sure that the American economy is strong and you want to protect American companies over foreign countries. That seems like something an American politician should do. Well, that's not going to happen because we have anti-BDS laws in place that say that if you boycott Israel, then the U.S. government and state governments will not work with you. Why are those laws in place? Well, they're in place because the Israel lobby worked in overdrive to get those laws in place. Overdrive. Okay. It was heavily funded by AIPAC in every single state, heavily pushed by AIPAC affiliates, Israel lobby affiliates, Zionist pro-Israel lobby, to make it illegal to boycott a country. Now, that goes very heavily against the First Amendment. Okay, freedom of speech, you should be able to do that. It's going to get overturned at the Supreme Court. I feel very, very confident it is within the next 4 years. And I'll make a whole video as to why I think that's very likely to happen, because we're already seeing states now start to pull back their laws on BDS movements. This started to happen because back in 2015, the BDS movement started, which stands for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And it was part of the Palestine movement to basically get American companies to boycott Israeli companies because of the fact that Israel's occupation in the occupied Palestinian territories. By taking action against Israeli companies, it hurts Israel's economy so much, it would force them to pull back. And of course, Israel doesn't want to pull back and doesn't want peace. So it decided to be manipulative and take over and push for US policy to change in order for Israel to continue its apartheid in the occupied West Bank. Okay, so that's what was going on. Now I'm going to show you more of these emails that I was able to find. This one is absolutely ridiculous, and this one is being sent now. Let me adjust it. This one here is being sent to the CEO of Ben and Jerry's. So not Unilever now, but it's going more specifically to the CEO of Ben and Jerry's. And this one is being written by, again, somebody who works for the government of Florida. Okay. So in this email, it says, or in this letter, it says, "Dear Mr. McCarthy, as you may be aware, the state of Florida is a friend of Israel, and this friendship is reflected in Florida law. Thus, many Floridians were disappointed to hear Ben & Jerry's plans to boycott Israel, which actually, that's a lie. It was to boycott the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories because they don't want sales there. But of course, they're going to, lie a little bit, which is undoubtedly the most free, democratic, and prosperous nation in the region. I'm writing to inform you that based on your July 19th announcement that Ben & Jerry's plans on cutting ties with Israel because the free and democratic nation is, quote, inconsistent with our values, may result in your business being placed on Florida's scrutinized companies that boycott Israel lists pursuant to Florida statutes. As you may know, Florida law prohibits the state from investing in companies that discriminate against Israel by refusing to deal with or terminate business activities in a discriminatory manner. Thus, as Florida's chief financial officer and a trustee of the State Board of Administration, it is my belief that Ben & Jerry's brazen refusal to do business in Israel, that's a lie again. Why is he saying in Israel? It's in the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territory, will result in your placement on the scrutinized companies that boycott Israel lists. Consequently, the state would be prohibited from investing in Ben & Jerry's or its parent company Unilever PLC. Further, if Ben & Jerry's is added to the list, the company, along with Unilever, will become ineligible to enter into renew contracts with the state of Florida or any Florida county or municipality. With this notice, I'm requesting Ben & Jerry's share its plan to remain in Israel through a different arrangement, as noted in July 19th announcement. If my office does not receive a response, I will exercise my authority by working with Florida's SBA to place Ben & Jerry's on the scrutinized company that boycott Israel lists. I intend to raise the issue at the next meeting of the trustees of State Board of Administration. Therefore, I encourage a response prior to the trustees meeting, which is currently scheduled for September 21st. Damn. That's what was going on, guys. We now have Florida taking action, and I want to make sure that you guys understand the timeline very well. It started with Israel's ambassador to the United Nations on the July 19th. Then immediately on the 22nd, we started to see a response back to Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, and then immediately the governments of states went to overdrive, now using the laws that were placed by the Israel lobby to go against the American company Unilever, and then, of course, taking action against Ben & Jerry's. Okay? It never ended up working out for Ben & Jerry's. Why? Because ultimately, Ben & Jerry's is a subsidiary of Unilever, and Unilever decided to sell the rights to an Israeli company in order for the sales of Ben & Jerry's ice cream to continue to be sold in the Palestinian territories. Fast forward now to 2025, Ben Cohen is the co-founder of Ben & Jerry's. Ben from Ben & Jerry's is Jewish. The guy's Jewish, okay? He's one of the biggest advocates for Palestinian rights. Actually, Ben's manager reached out to me like last week to help them out with one of their campaigns that they're doing. They're making a Palestine ice cream flavor. Ben is not Ben and Jerry's, not the actual company. Why? Because Unilever won't allow them to, because Ben and Jerry's wanted to make a Palestine ice cream flavor. So Ben's like, peace, ditched it, leaving, and now he's making a Palestine ice cream flavor on his own. Okay. And they're basically getting community support to come up with the branding and the flavor and everything else. So it didn't end up working out for Ben and Jerry's because of the fact they sold to Unilever back in the year 2000. Okay. Now we have governments taking action against those companies. Okay. Here's where this is crazy. Will you find a company in Israel? Do you find Israeli legislation that has it make it illegal for an Israeli company to engage in a boycott of the United States? Absolutely not. Where are you going to find that? There is no legislation like that. There isn't any. So why does this legislation apply into the United States, and why is it only applicable to Israel? Why only Israel? They state that it's because Israel's the only Jewish state. Okay. Well, so it's the only Jewish state, and apparently it's anti-Semitic to boycott an occupied territory, occupied Palestinian territory. It's not even Israel's. That's anti-Semitic. Everything is anti-Semitic to these people. Everything is. And because of that, now we're going to have the Israel lobby just scheming to go ahead and put policies in place for American companies not to act to their own accord. And if you thought I was trying to do the hands there, and Anna Kasparian got the hate for going like this when she said scheming, well, guess what? There's the hands there. They're freaking scheming to stop American companies from selling from deciding not to sell in Israeli occupied territories. It's messed up. Something's very wrong with that. Okay? So that's kind of where we're at now, guys. And luckily, Abby Martin, who I previously mentioned, you guys probably see her a lot on social media. She speaks out a lot about Israel, Israel's actions, Palestine, the occupied West Bank, Gaza. And again, like I said, back in 2020, I believe, she was going to give a conference she was going to speak at a conference at a Georgia university, and she actually won the case. She won the case because she said that it goes against the First Amendment, and she pushed the case to Georgia. Well, I didn't even know that governments could do this. I didn't know that this was allowed. I think this is like messed up and it's shady as hell. But if you go ahead and you sue a state on their BDS laws, well, she ended up doing it. She won. It could have went to the Supreme Court. But in order for it not to go to the Supreme Court, what Georgia ended up doing is they shifted and they changed and amended the law just a little bit to make it that only companies that have over $100,000 in investments, the law of boycott, divestment, and sanction is applicable to. They changed the law while Abby Martin's case was going on, because then it basically makes Abby Martin's case null and void. That's what they did. And because that happened, it basically killed the chances of Abby Martin's case going to the Supreme Court. Now, a lot of states now started also amending these laws because they want to make it more difficult for somebody to take legal action against them, because the worst fear is that the perfect case gets to the Supreme Court. And if it gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court states that this is unconstitutional, every single BDS law in all 35 states or more immediately canceled. So that's why now they're shifting the laws, because they want to keep them and they want to make sure that it's kept in a way that the most painful, the action that could hurt Israel the most, which would be taken obviously by a massive company deciding to boycott, is the ones that the laws remain applicable to. And because such a large company like that would likely not even decide to boycott Israel because of the backlash, it makes it harder for them to have that law removed, because it would then require not only an American company to decide to boycott Israel, but it would then require that American company to decide to sue. And it would then require that American company wanting to fight the system and bring it to the Supreme Court and to overturn the law in every single state. Can it happen? Absolutely. It's just going to take some time. It's going to happen, though. Here's another thing. RFK Jr., you guys might remember, actually, this was just this past year, where that ridiculous legislation came forward by the Trump administration stating that if a state or city decides to boycott Israel, they're going to have their FEMA fundings removed. They're not going to receive their disaster aid, their disaster aid funding. And every state and people, or everybody on social media, just was outraged. And they're like, "What the hell do you mean if I boycott Israel? If my state boycotts Israel, we're not going to receive funding for disaster preparedness aid? What the hell are you talking about?" And then they immediately kind of like switched it up a little bit, and they're like, "No, actually, that's not. We're not allowing this." They changed it a little bit, but actually on paper, it still kind of says that. Yada yada yada. Well, that's the kind of laws that need to be overturned because it's unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional. It is, and you can ask any lawyer to just look at these BDS laws, and they'll tell you it was heavily pushed by the Israel lobby. Now, here's why I think, and I'm going to be making a video on this later. If you are a scientist, or if you know somebody that's a scientist, an American scientist, or if you know somebody that is a manager of a research lab here in the United States, and your friend or somebody that you know, or maybe even you, are a scientist at a research lab in the United States, and you require federal grants, the federal government is going to make you sign a contract stating you can't boycott Israel. Refuse to sign it and sue them. I'm saying this out publicly now. If you are a scientist in the United States and the federal government under Trump's administration is telling you to sign a contract stating that you won't boycott Israel because you're going to have your funding terminated, sue them and try to push that shit to get to the Supreme Court. That is like my biggest wish right now for any scientists in the United States that receives federal funding. F that document. Don't sign it, and not just don't sign it, but change. You can actually a scientist out there could actually change U.S. legislation now and can actually do something to really change government. We can actually do this. So again, if you're a scientist, there are a lot of organizations, ACLU. There are a lot of nonprofits that will back you and pay for your lawyers, pay for your legal fees, pay for everything if you decide to sue the federal government to try to get this law overturned. And the reason I'm saying scientists specifically is because it would be the best case. The best case scenario is to find a scientist that is currently receiving federal funds from the US government. It makes a perfect case. I'll make a whole separate video on it later, but that is basically the perfect legal case that could very likely get to the Supreme Court. That specific situation, if there was a scientist that's receiving federal funds that gets their funding terminated because they decided to boycott Israel. So again, if you are a scientist or you know somebody, email me, reach out to me. I will help figure out a way to make this happen. I really just want to get this thing to the Supreme Court and get this overturned. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So anyways, guys, that's really it for this video. It was a pretty big deep dive. I've been looking through and I'm finding a lot of documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests from 2000 all the way up until now. I've told you just a few weeks ago, I submitted my own Freedom of Information Act request to the CIA, requesting all files to be released between James Angleton, the chief of counterintelligence at the time during John F. Kennedy's administration, and Israel. Of course, they'll probably send something over 6 years from now, and it's going to be basically an entire pamphlet full of redactions, but it's about taking the action to at least get something, to at least push the government. We have to try to do what we can do, So anyways, guys, if you find my channel interesting and you want to support my channel, super chats and gifts really help me be able to do this like a full-time job. I'd appreciate the support. Also, give this a thumbs up and comment below. Give it a like. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. And